Hello, my name is Daniel Hodab, and we have today our second session of the study group regarding the raw material. And I will hand over to our host, Gabriel.
Hello, formally everybody, and everybody else who is listening on YouTube. We are indeed in session number 2. So we're going to do, like I said, it's a sort of summary. It's the best we could do within, the constraint of the hour. I did prepare, several slides as usual to go over what I consider to be the most relevant part of the material to me. But as always, I want to say that a thorough reading of the session, beats everything. So nothing like just going over it again. There is some information that I am omitting in my slides, of course. And those mostly have to do with the last question. So I'm going to go back and forth here at the beginning in the introduction. This last question was all about the circle of one and how Ra gave the directions on how to do this ritual, which they perform for every session. I think at the beginning of the session, sometimes I even had to repeat it. So I won't be talking about that. All that you find there is just instructions, and there are some indications about the appurtenances, or these items that they were placed at the top of Carla's head and so on. There's also a lot of skipping. I'm skipping some of the information about Ra's background. As I said, I'm keeping just some of the stuff that I find relevant or really essential. But there is a long read there in question number 2. That's their background, their story, their relationship to Egypt, and so on. Those are one of the first questions that, of course, were asked to Ra. And then, in general, we just have information about crystal healing, something about the pyramids, and yeah, some cliffhanger there about the capstone on top of the pyramids, which I kind of forget. Maybe somebody else can illuminate us a little bit more. I know I did some research back then about the capstone, and there are some fears about what was up there, but yeah, so that is what we're going to get into in some of my slides. And yeah, I guess let's begin. Let me see if I can share already. Yes, I can. Okay. Can everybody see the slides? Are they up there? Yes. Thank you, Joe. What else? That's it. Okay, so I actually never cover this in my Law of One series on YouTube, but here there's a little trivia for you. And I'm actually going to see if anybody can pick this. You have to be a nerd to pick this up. And it's actually highlighted, but this is Ra's initial statement when they open the session. And they say, "I am Ra, I greet you in the love and the light of our infinite creator. I am with this mind, body, spirit complex, which has offered itself for a channel." There's a little bit unusual, wording here, because it's the first session that they are doing together without the group of people that were present in the first session. And, that's nothing unusual in an exaggerated way, but I just mean that part where they say, we are with this instrument, basically, that offer itself for a channel. And then they say, "I communicate with you." Does that ring to anybody? Anything? I wouldn't blame you for not knowing.
I communicate with you.
Right.
Or we.
Do you see? You know what's unusual there? I communicate with you. There's actually 2 unusual things, I believe.
They usually say we communicate now.
Yeah, that's it. That's the one. Now, what's interesting is that, yes, we communicate now. I think this is the only time where they say, I communicate with you. Again, this is trivia. I don't think there's anything too important here. But there is a session, I think it's session 82, 84, somewhere around there, where Don says, because he noticed that sometimes they would say, I communicate now, and then sometimes we communicate now. And there's a funny part what Ross says, like, the reason why is it that we say that? And they say, well, it's just kind of stranger in your language. Imagine us saying we am Ra. So it's just one of those moments where you're like, cheeky humor from Ra. So yeah, I did a little digging, and there's like 20% of all the sessions they say I communicate now, and the other 80% is we communicate now. Nothing too important. I just felt like it was something to mention. There's more here. Why is this? No. This is not working. No, that's why. One sec. That'll greatly facilitate things. Okay, so another part that I want to point out at the beginning, when they say queries are in order, remember this is raw opening without having any questions yet. They always open with, we greet you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator, we communicate now, or something to that effect. But here, in one of the few cases, of course, this is their second session, and they're establishing basically the format that they feel comfortable with. And so they say queries are in order in your projections of mind distortion at this time space. So basically, you ask the questions based on what you want to know. Thusly, would I assure this group that my own social memory complex has one particular method of communicating with those few who may be able to harmonize their distortion with ours, and that is to respond to queries for information. We are comfortable with this format. May the queries now begin. This is the unusual, or what stands out from the raw material, which is that they didn't give a sermon. They didn't just, channel or word channel as we're going to give you information because we want to. We have a sort of agenda in the non-pejorative use of the word. But rather they said, you ask questions and we answer. And we know from studying the law of one, the material, that they were very keen on not abridging free will, which meant you ask the question, we'll give you answers, but we won't give you answers to things that we consider that will interfere with your learning process. So I think this is one of the things that we enjoy most about the law of one, which is, again, unusual or uncharacteristic from other channelings, is that the desire from Ra to maintain the information as pristine as possible is because of this. They prefer this, and they're very adamant in not, giving information that shouldn't be, that could infringe on Don's learning, or anybody else for that matter. So yes, that's their establishment saying, you're going to ask the questions, we will answer. And sometimes we see it across the material, things like Ross saying, we perceive that you have a question, but you didn't ask it. So please reconsider, asking the question, and things like that. I think Jay has a question or something to say.
Yeah, didn't Raw also not attempt to bridge free will because they would lose polarization as well?
True.
I think so. Yeah, I think more than anything, I actually vaguely remember a point in which they said, they didn't explicitly say it, but it was something that they consider to be like, you know what, it's a good sacrifice for us to give you this information because it will extend the duration of Carla's life or something to that effect. And Don actually says something like, I'm sorry, that we got into this, and it affected you. But yeah, I think Ra was mostly interested not so much in their polarization, but rather in interfering with the learning process. But yeah, it's I would think, if memory serves, that yeah, they would lose some sort of polarization. But at this point, I think, yeah, that their biggest interest is just in us learning, because the way they see us is they're seeing the creator, and they don't see us as separate beings, but rather as the creator experiencing itself, and in a very childish, not childish in the pejorative way again, but just in the immature, we're very spiritually immature as entities. So yeah, it was mostly, I think, out of love for keeping, the fun of experiencing ourselves, and not putting, because I think that's basically what infringing on free will is to kind of impose your own view of the world onto others. And we experience this in inner work when we realize that the reason why I'm uncomfortable with you is because I think you should be different, right? And of course, because I think you should be different, I have the way in which you should be, so I want to teach you that. I want to show you that. That's a sort of infringement. And, it goes against, obviously, the perennial suggestion of accepting everybody as they are, and rejoicing in that. So we move to the first question from Don here, and he says, I'm guessing that there are enough people who would understand what you are saying, interested in us enough for us to make a book of communications with it. And I wondered if you would agree to this, us making a book. And if so, I was thinking that possibly a bit of historical background on yourself would be in order. So here we see Don's right away interest in creating a book out of this. He felt that this was his life work, and he stated several times, Carla talks about this in book 5, or her commentary in the sessions. And yeah, he just felt like this was it. Once he heard Ra talk, he said, this is so different from all the channelings before. So we see Don's initial interest in creating a book here. We can see some of the vicissitudes that he had to go through, or they had to go through, with the editorial, and people saying, we have no idea what this guy is saying here. It sounds fantastic, but I don't think we can make a book out of this. The rejection of his books, and so many other things that are outside of the material itself, but just part of the story. I like to sometimes point out at the story of what was happening, because we can get so much into the material that we forget the 3 people that were going through this process. And I don't know, just kind of refreshing to see, what their sacrifice was. And speaking of sacrifice in the spiritual way, of course, just you do this out of passion, and you make a choice, and you go through, what your service is, as Ross said. So let's write a book, and maybe give us some background of yourself. So Ra first addresses the possibility of creating the book, and the reason for them channeling or contacting them. And they say the possibility of communication, as you would call it, from the one to the one through distortion acceptable for meaning, is the reason we contacted this group. Which means, in essence, the possibility that we can communicate to you in this direction and essentially talk about this beautiful philosophy is the reason why we contacted you. That's it. When they say the possibility of communication from the one to the one through distortion acceptable for meaning, meaning that language, that's the distortion acceptable that creates some sort of meaning of what they're talking about, right? From creator to creator, from the one to the one. That's the reason why we wanted to talk to you, because you're willing to understand, you're willing to go through this exploration. So yes, we can see this also reflected in our lives. Sometimes we find people who are very willing to share this information. And so here we are in a Zoom call, right? So that's the reason why we're communicating with each other. We find this, and yeah, it's finding a rare gem. That's what it is. So you're all beautiful gems, is what I'm saying. Never forget that. There are few who will grasp without significant distortion that which we communicate through this connection with this mind-body-spirit complex. Indeed, we don't have a society that is, I think, as we say in Spanish, raining over wet floor. But it is true. We as a society, we don't care much about this type of information. So there are a few people who would be interested in this. However, they say, if it be your desire to share our communications with others, we have the distortion towards a perception that this would be most helpful in regularizing and crystallizing your own patterns of vibration upon the levels of experience which you call the life. This is beautiful. Before I finish this paragraph, just focus your attention on this. Ra, in essence, is saying here, and I think they repeated at some point, the fact that you want to write a book, that's your own service. You know, we are just happy to communicate with you because we find that it's most helpful to you in regularizing and crystallizing yourself. You're talking to Don and, of course, Jim and Carla, but they didn't contact. Now, this is something that we forget because we're so much in the material. Of course, it's produced already, it's published, and it's shared. But they didn't have to write this book. In fact, Ra contacted them just because they said, you are cool people that can understand us. And that's all we want. We just want to communicate with you. The fact that we have this is because Don decided to write the book. Jim helped, and Carla obviously was the channel. But that wasn't the intention that Ra had. This is something that I mentioned to Gary in Kentucky this year when he did this beautiful homage to Carla and her sacrifice to do all of this. And yeah, I mentioned to him, we forget that this wasn't even meant to be a book, at least not by Ra's desire. It was all done. That was their decision, and thanks to them. So continuing on with this paragraph, there's something else that I would want to open also to you guys if you want to chime in on how you interpret this. If one is illuminated, are not all illuminated. Therefore, we are oriented towards speaking for you in whatever supply of speakingness, I love that choice of word, you may desire. To teach, learn is the law of one in one of its most elementary distortions. So does anybody want to chime in on this? If one is illuminated, are not all illuminated? And this is within, of course, the context that we're going to communicate to you this information, and the fact that it's helpful to you, that's all that matters, right? And yes, at the end they say this this teaching of the law of one is basically one of the things that we cannot help but do, right? So I think it was at the beginning in session 1 or somewhere else when they said that they said something like it's inevitable to want to teach and yet is sort of impossible to teach. But yeah, that just highlights how we are interested in sharing this information and just enjoying it. So yeah, if one is illuminated, are not all illuminated. Let me give some of my thoughts here. In our spiritual communities, in our train of thoughts that we get, we're often considering the fact that how am I contributing to the world? Right? How am I alleviating distortions, and how, we begin to see that the world will change, with certain contributions that we do. And I guess that's a way of seeing it. But
Gabriel,
yes,
Joe
Danny.
have a question regarding it. Joe, you want to ask the question by yourself, or
Sure. Sorry, Gabriel. I I couldn't find the hand anywhere. And I wanted to ask you on the previous slide, what was meant by understanding the material causing significant distortion to us. So there are few who will grasp without significant distortion. What does that mean, significant distortion?
Sure. So a way we can see this is, remember that the word distortion is being used across the raw material in sort of two ways. The first one is anything is a distortion, because from pure awareness or pure being, anything that is a revolution, a movement, a wave of the mind, what we call mind, right? What's the first Hermetic principle? The all is mind. So anything that is in motion, or awareness, being in motion, is a distortion. That's the sort of language that Ra uses here. That's the first use that we have. And the other use in distortion across the material, which is very much used in terms of spiritual evolution, is how much this distortion is aligned in the return to source. The return to source being your crystallization, your capacity for simply being. Now, that's just how it's translated in mystical terms. Simply being a spontaneous person. So I believe the use, obviously, that is being used here is that as they present information that is aligned, or the law of one message is to bring you to springboard you to the direction of spiritual evolution, then this distortion that they talk about is the less distortion, or the less distorted the understanding is, the more pure, the more aligned it is with the message of the law of one. So few are which will grasp this message, this understanding, without too much too much distortion, or what other word can we use here? Deviation, or just straying away from the meaning, from the pure meaning. Does that make sense, Joe?
What I'm kind of thinking that your meaning, or its meaning, is that that few will align with it, will be able to align with it. In other words, so somebody reading this may think it's just utter, rubbish, whereas another person will read it and think we will it will resonate with them. Is that along the same lines? Otherwise, no, I don't understand.
No, absolutely, yes. There's a level of interest that people have, in this. I wouldn't, and just me trying to be thorough, some people who are in this path, they may not resonate with the way, Ra explained things. And that's okay. This is obviously not, just like we can resonate with a sort of mystical tradition and not with another. That's totally fine. So the same thing may happen here. But I think, the distinction is when you said some people would think it's rubbish, and it's true, because some people would actually look at it and say, no, I don't want any of this stuff. Like, it's not even like rejecting that, the language, that's fine if we don't resonate with certain languages. But the rejection from a spiritual point of view, that they're not even interested in this path. Their attention and their focus is on the material plane, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes,
But
it does. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure. So there's this view, that's where I want to focus at least a couple of minutes on this. This view of if one is illuminated, are not all illuminated. How does that work? Well, it so happens that everybody is a function of you. Now, I'm not saying that you will change the world as we think is the mind can control it and change it at will, but rather that if your perception changes, then your perception of everything will change with it. So if you are illuminated, everything will change automatically because it'll stop being seen or perceived the way it was perceived before. So that's why in all mystical traditions, they always tell you to forget about the world and people. You're not here to change anybody but yourself. And once you change that, then guess what? Everything changes. And we all have different experiences that align with this understanding. You see, people outside don't have to change at all. They can and should be the way they are. That's how we accept them. And it's that through this pure acceptance, through this allowing of ourselves to also unfold, that everything else is illuminated. So we don't need, in essence, other people to be illuminated for this world to change. We change, then the world changes automatically. I think we're going to question 2. Yeah, so we're going to move where, there it is. Okay, I think we're going to go into the background of Ra here. And I think this is Dawn asking about themselves. Give us a little bit more information about yourself. And this is one of the long questions that we have. I wanted to share this and maybe 1 or 2 more slides on this question, where Ra says, in giving this information, that is, I think they were talking about the law of one, right? We ask the proper lack of stress be placed. Oh no, this is given the information about themselves, right? So give us some information about Ra, your purpose in the what do you call it? Egypt society and all of this. So they say, in giving this information about ourselves, we ask the proper lack of stress be placed upon our experiences in your local space-time. That teach learning, which is our responsibility, is philosophical rather than historical. Here are one of the few things that we can see in, I'm a little cautious to say that this is Ra's personality, but in a way it is, or their intention, right? The intention of their being is to teach philosophically rather than historical. That's why in the introduction we had on this project, this study group, I mentioned that I keep all this information of history at the bottom of the interesting stuff that is in the material, as they also label it transient. This is transient information. And so I find this, of course, to me, a highlight in session 2, when they're saying, we're going to talk about ourselves and our influence in your society, because guess what? There is some history there. But we ask the proper lack of stress be placed upon our experiences in your local space-time. In essence, don't pay attention to history or don't get too focused. I have noticed over time, I got into this path by also exploring some of the conspiracy theories and the repressed history, right? A lot of us got interested in this. And I remember seeing a lot of people who have dedicated their lives just to find out, what is under the Sphinx, something like that, right? And that's, I guess, what Ra, in a way, said, try not to get deviated to that. There's a bigger message that we want to talk about, and that is philosophical. That's where we find, to me, the most important information, which is the mystical path that Ra suggests. However, they will talk about that, and I want to do honor to what they said. I think this is something that is important for the next question because they talk about crystal use. So among the many things that they said in this answer, they say, we came and were welcomed by the peoples whom we wish to serve. That's the Egyptians. We attempt to aid them in technical ways having to do with the healing of mind, body, spirit complex distortions through the use of the crystal, appropriate to the distortion, placed within a certain appropriate series of ratios of time, space, and material. Thus were the pyramids created. So that's what, in their naivete, they decided to do. Let's go and give them technology to these well-intentioned people. We know what happened. The Egyptians said, oh, this is awesome. You know, we have authority over other people, and they sort of deviated from everything. So what was the intention of creating the pyramids? As we will see throughout the material, the whole pyramid was just an initiation and healing device. It is one of the many ways in which we can, I believe it's a very drastic way to do it. And there have been these types of systems of initiation where it's very drastic. And to my understanding, there was a resonating chamber, the initiation, the healing chamber. And so people who were interested, of course, in being initiated would go through this, and they would go through an ego breakdown and a projection of themselves and all kinds of things that were performed in the pyramid. So that's what they decided to do. The pyramid, just spoiler alerts, the pyramids don't work anymore because they're no longer aligned. This all has to do with a metaphysical web of fields that I don't understand, to be honest, but they were kind of aligned at that time. They no longer work. And Rod did say in session 4 that the time of the pyramids is gone. We now can do all this work together. There are people who are able to do this without the aid of the pyramids. And we don't need anything but just ourselves. And I think that's always been the case. They just basically gave us that pyramid because they thought it would be useful. There's more to this answer. But keep in mind the crystal, the use of crystal. That was part of the pyramid. They used not only the chambers, but the healer with a crystal. So finishing this question, Ross says, we found that the technology was reserved largely for those with the effectual mind-body distortion of power. It's interesting that they didn't say mind-body spirit. So they had the mind-body distortion of power. This was not intended by the law of one. This is, of course, the priest caste and the hierarchies that develop after that. However, they say we have never left your vibration due to our responsibility for the changes in consciousness we had first caused, then found distorted in ways not relegated to the law of one. It's my uneducated speculation that a lot of those distortions is what came out of Egyptian religions and ways of belief the world is, and so on. They're not entirely, of course, just like in, Christianity or Abrahamic religions. It's kind of mixed. There are many distortions here and there, from one way to the other, negative and positive. So I think the Egyptians did something similar, and Ra feels responsible for that. So they have always been present telepathically. They sort of retreated back into time space and have been available for metaphysical contact, if you will. Dan?
Yes, I would like to ask a question here. It's written, this was not intended by the law of one. But do you think why he didn't say it was not intended by us?
Say the question again. What was not intended by them?
It's written in the last sentence what you just read. This was not intended by the law of one, the distortion of power. So
Oh,
why
okay.
Ra used not the term, it was not intended by Ra or not intended by us, and use here the term law of one.
Sure. So again, my interpretation of this is so any teacher, any non-dual teacher would always stress out that what is doing the work is the teaching, not the teacher. If we take the focus out of the teacher, we understand that what's being spoken is the teaching itself. So my interpretation of this is that, this is not what the teaching is saying. In other words, the teaching, if we can compress the purpose of the pyramids, which is initiation for awakening and helping others, which is what Ra says here. I apologize that I didn't put that part, but it's somewhere there where they say this is the intention of the pyramids was to initiate and then help others who want to be in this place. That's the main teaching of the law of one across the whole universe, right? The creator wants to know itself. And so if we can compress the meaning of the pyramids being that, then that is the purpose of the teaching. That's the purpose of initiation and spiritual evolution. So it's not, however, what Ra says here, to create a religion, to create hierarchies, to create a sort of caste of priests, which are above others and so on. That's what kind of was generated from this tool, from this mechanism that was the pyramid. And so this is what was not intended by the teaching, by the law of one. Substitute law of one with the one teaching, or what we call non-duality. At least in my own heart, I know it as non-dual, the non-dual nature of reality, that understanding. So that's what I would say is
Okay,
their
thank
meaning.
you.
Sure. So, okay. Jumping to question 3, this is where Don says, in essence, we're interested in that which you call crystal healing, right? How is that related to the topic of the pyramids? And actually, he didn't ask what if that was related, but it was about crystal healing. Yes. So, quick summary of the answer. Again, they say, without the relative crystallization of the healer working with the crystal will not be properly charged. So here we're talking about the crystal. How do we use a crystal? Well, the relative crystallization of the healer is most important rather than the crystal. So playing with crystals may have an effect. Most important is for the healer to be crystallized, because that's where the energy comes through. Now, I will be the first one to say I'm not very familiar with crystal healing and the process, which crystals can be used and so on. That's a topic that goes beyond my pay rate, but I do understand the crystallization of the healer. It's the same crystallization of anybody else. It's the initiation and the constant alignment or crystallization of our energy centers to become a channel, basically, of the one infinite intelligence that is the creator. So there's a part where Ra says that the crystallized healer has no will. It's a way to say you have no desire. The crystallized healer has no particular desire, but rather just to be as it's supposed to be. So no personality, basically. So there are 2 other parts where they say the delicacy, shall we say, of the choosing of the crystal is very critical, and in truth, a crystalline structure such as a diamond or ruby can be used by, again, a purified channel. That's the crystallized healer, who is filled with the love light of one in almost any application. So yes, the crystals seem to be very important. Once again, I believe somebody who is an expert on crystals can talk more about this. We met Kent in Kentucky. I wish he would be here to also talk about this. He loves crystals and his whole work, it revolves around this. But the one point that I can talk about is this purified channel, the crystallized healer. That is the most important part. So anybody who is attempting to help others, and this doesn't have to do with crystals either. If, you know, they're assisting others in ayahuasca ceremonies, or they are teaching Kundalini energy or anything like that, the crystallization of the person is most relevant to the result that's going to come out of that. So something to keep in mind for ourselves and others. This, of course, takes initiation, the capacity for becoming a crystallized healer. And there have never been many to persevere to the extent of progressing through the various distortion leavings which initiation causes. So that's another sort of message there, that, yeah, it's not an easy path to become this crystallized healer. And yeah, it doesn't seem like it's I feel like a lot of this is because we haven't developed an interest in this technology. Maybe in the past we had with Atlantis and everything else. It seems like they had high technology with this, and they still kind of blew up the planets to a degree. So they weren't very wise. But we still don't have this skill. It's my understanding. Definitely not as a society. So again, it just invites us to continue to do our own work in crystallization. This is the last slide that I have, and they're talking about pyramids here now, and they say the purposes of the pyramids were two. Firstly, to have a properly oriented place of initiation for those who wish to become purified or initiated channels for the law of one. So yes, I did include this. I thought this was prior, but it's towards the end. So this is the purpose of the pyramids, right? First, to have a place of initiation for those who wanted to become purified or initiated channels. So exactly what they needed for crystal healing. And channels for what? The law of one. What's the law of one? This non-dual understanding, or this understanding of unity, this union, this yoga, whatever word we want to use here. The law of one represents, or is among all these other terms, to become this channel for teaching the law of one. The second purpose was, we wish then to carefully guide the initiates in developing a healing of the people whom they sought to aid and the planet itself. So it's a very compassionate and well-intentioned desire and purpose, but it didn't work. And again, one, initiate people; two, help those who could be helped by developing a system that was efficient and effective, and was, of course, aligned with the spiritual path, evolution. So those were the purposes of the pyramid. And that's it. That's all I got for this presentation. Again, I would invite you all to read it if you haven't already. There is a very long answer in terms of the circle of one, what did they do, and all of that, but I have no comments on that.
Thank you, Gabriel. Anyone have a question? I see, yeah, Joe have already a question. Yeah, Joe, ask.
I have to put my hand up physically. I still haven't found the thing. Yeah. Well, Ra said that they, you know, they gave them the pyramid because they thought it would help. But there are hundreds of pyramids around all over the world, and yeah, I mean, how come there are so many in so many other countries? Does this mean that other entities went to other countries, or, you know, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so actually within the material, I'll try to stick with the material as much as possible. Within the material, and actually in this session, I didn't cover it, but they talk about this more. I think it's in session 17, 20 something, around those sessions, where they talk more about the social memory complex that helps South America. I think there were three actually. It was South America, Egypt, and somewhere else, I forget. But there were three main social memory complexes working at the same time.
Mexico, maybe?
Might have been, although I think that includes the social memory complex that was in South America. If I remember, I'll put it in the chat that we have. But yeah, the point is that I'm not sure if all of them were, because for example, in Egypt, they suggest that they actually built them. Ra built it from, you know, from thought. And so we know how debated this is about who built the pyramids and how they did it and so on. But that's how they did it. I'm not quite sure that that was done also in South America. It seems like they might have done it in the past in Atlantis. I mean, there are so many supposed pyramids in Antarctica and other places in the world. I think there was a tendency for humans to also build pyramids. I may speculate that this is also through imprints, channeling imprints, because that's, if I'm allowed to also share my view of how the great mind works. We have information. It's not like we are discrete packets of information, but we're all sharing information. What I am is essentially the filtering of the planetary consciousness in a very limited way, which I called me, you know, in which I identify as me. So we all are. But that means that all of this database is there. And once this is imprinted in the collective consciousness, then that's available for other people. I think, you know, it was very strong. It's a very strong influence at the time. And that's why we built so many pyramids. Ra even says, you know, we built the 3 great pyramids. I think they mentioned that. So there were other social memory complexes that definitely helped in South America. That one I know for sure. And that's why we find pyramids all over the place. But like I said, I do strongly believe that humans basically had this imprint. I mean, Rupert Sheldrake talks about the morphic field of resonance, right? And that's an understanding from a scientific point of view that, you know, what we know right now gets shared across everybody. So my speculation is that once this is imprinted, it becomes available to all of us. And it really just depends on our seeking. And they were in contact, apparently, South America. There's actually a beautiful story about the great civilization of South America. We're talking about maybe 1,000 years ago. There were like 30 million people living there. Where in Europe, there weren't even 5 million, I think. It was a very small population. How did they live in the Amazons like this? Very harsh climate and so on. So it's a great civilization that's lost, in essence, because we brought them from Europe. It's you European guys that brought us the biological warfare. It was all virus and bacteria. But yeah, that's what pretty much wiped all South America and the Americas in general. But I digress.
Did you answer your question, Joe? Okay. I think
yes, as much as, yes.
Thank you, Joe, for your question. Suwen, have a question, I guess. I see your hand up.
I just have a comment. So
Yeah,
Ra
go ahead.
in somewhere else did say some of the pyramids around the world are built for a balancing pyramid. They're not for initiation, they're for balancing the energy of the earth. That's all. Thank you.
That's a very good point. Yes, Sue, thank you. That I think actually not many pyramids were for initiation. They mentioned that some of them were for studying also. I think those were the three main purposes. The least use was for initiation. The other one was for, I think, like you said, balancing. And I think the most use was for studying. I'm not sure how that worked, but yeah, maybe it was like, you know, the temple. We do see that almost all ecclesiastic buildings have this pointed shape, right? Cathedrals and so on. They seem to have, because they apparently accumulate some metaphysical energy that flows through it, and that's why we have this pointed buildings. So maybe, you know, that was the tendency to create a space. Square spaces are actually, you know, not too much fun. We know that. We still build square houses. That's why the wind blows it too. Blows up our ceilings. We haven't learned. We still want to think straight. Yeah, square. But yeah, those were the purposes of the pyramid too. Thanks for pointing that out, Sue.
Anyone else wanted to ask or comment something? This is the right time for now. I can add something that what I read once is that the pyramids which Ra talks about in Egypt, when you are looking at the GPS coordinates of the pyramids, they're indicating the same degrees, the same numbers as the speed of light in the metric system. I don't know if somebody of you know it, and I found that fact very interesting. The speed of light indicating the same numbers as the GPS coordinates of the Egypt pyramids. That one was also very interesting to me.
I actually remember reading so many things about the pyramid that were super interesting in terms of, yeah, ratios and numbers. There was something related to, I think it was the sum of all the sizes were something about the year, 365 days of the year, or something even more precise. I forget already. But yeah, there are very interesting facts about the pyramid and the position also. I didn't know about the speed of light. That's or at least I don't remember, but yeah, there's a lot of information about pyramids that it can go into its own rabbit hole. Who knows? They're very mysterious.
Yes. So if no one has any further questions, so I will thank Gabriel and I will stop the recording now. Thank you very much, everyone.